Most people think wars are won by stronger weapons, bigger guns, thicker armor, faster machines. That belief sounds logical until history humiliates it. Because some of the most powerful armies ever built did not lose because they were weak, they lost because they were answering the wrong question. And if you understand what happened at Arracourt in the autumn of 1944, you will understand something far bigger than a tank battle. You will understand why empires collapse while smaller systems survive. Why some people spend their lives upgrading tools, while others quietly build a machine that makes those tools irrelevant. September 1944, 3 months after D-Day. France was breaking open faster than Germany could respond. American armored columns pushed eastward almost without stopping. Entire German formations were retreating toward the border in chaos. Fuel depots burned, supply lines collapsed, cities fell one after another. But deep inside the fog-covered farmland of Lorraine, Germany believed it still had one final chance to reverse the momentum of the war. Arracourt. Not a famous city, not a legendary fortress, just a quiet region of fields, forests, and narrow roads that almost nobody outside the military had ever heard of. Yet within days, it would become one of the deadliest graveyards for German armored forces on the entire Western Front. Before sunrise on September 19th, 4 American M18 Hellcats sat motionless in a shallow depression near the village of Bazoches-le-Petit. The fog was so thick that morning, a man could barely see beyond 200 meters. The crews inside the Hellcats could hear their own breathing louder than the outside world. Then, the ground began to shake. A distant metallic thunder rolled through the trees. Heavy engines, slow movement, steel tracks grinding wet earth into mud. Somewhere inside the fog, German Panthers were advancing toward them. The Panther was not just another tank. It was Germany's masterpiece.
44 tons of steel, 100 millimeters of sloped frontal armor, a long-barreled 75mm gun capable of destroying Sherman tanks from over a mile away. On paper, the Panther represented the peak of armored warfare in 1944. Every battlefield statistic favored it. Every technical chart confirmed its superiority. The Hellcat, by comparison, looked almost suicidal. Its armor was so thin that heavy machine gun fire could penetrate it under the right conditions. A direct hit from a Panther usually meant instant destruction. The American crews understood that perfectly. They had spent the entire summer watching Sherman tanks burn across France. They knew exactly what German armor could do, which is why they refused to fight the battle Germany expected. That was the difference. The Germans believed they were entering a traditional tank engagement. The Americans were preparing something entirely different. The Hellcats remained silent, engines low, guns aimed toward the fog, waiting for geometry instead of courage, waiting for the Panthers to expose their sides instead of attacking head-on. Then the first shadow appeared. A Panther emerged through the mist at dangerously close range. Before the German crew could fully identify the threat, an American gun fired. The first Panther exploded almost instantly.
To understand why Arracourt became a nightmare for Germany, you first have to understand why the Panther existed at all. In the summer of 1941, German forces invaded the Soviet Union, expecting another rapid victory. Instead, somewhere inside the endless mud and snow of the Eastern Front, German tank crews encountered something they were not prepared for. The T-34. At first glance, it looked crude, rough steel, harsh construction, no elegance. But the moment German shells began bouncing off its sloped armor, panic spread through the Panzer divisions. Soviet tanks were surviving hits that should have destroyed them. Worse, their wide tracks allowed them to move through terrain where German armor became trapped in mud. For the first time in the war, Germany realized another nation had changed the mathematics of armored combat. So German engineers did what Germany always did best. They studied the enemy with obsessive precision. They examined the T-34 piece by piece. They analyzed the armor angles, the mobility, the weight distribution, the gun performance. Then they decided to build something even deadlier. The result was the Panther. Everything about the vehicle was designed for domination in a direct armored confrontation. Thick frontal armor, angled to deflect incoming fire, a high-velocity gun capable of killing enemy tanks before they could even respond, advanced optics, superior long-range accuracy. Against Allied armor in open terrain, the Panther became a predator. And unlike propaganda myths created after the war, this superiority was very real. British tank crews in Normandy feared Panthers for a reason. Soviet crews on the Eastern Front learned to avoid frontal engagements whenever possible. American Sherman crews understood quickly that a head-on fight against a Panther usually ended one way: burning American steel. The terrifying part was not just the Panther's armor. It was distance.
At 1,500 meters, a Panther could destroy a Sherman before the American crew even realized they had been spotted. The battlefield became psychological. German tank crews often fired first because they could see farther, aim better, and penetrate deeper. In a traditional tank battle, the Panther was almost unfair, and Germany knew it. That confidence became even stronger after an event that echoed through every armored command in Europe. June 13th, 1944.
Keep revving it, we have to get
Villers-Bocage, Normandy.
It's
A British
overheating, we're
armored column
stuck,
from the
sir!
famous 7th Armored Division
that tank
advanced
up
through
now!
narrow French roads, believing the area was relatively secure. Vehicles stretched across the road in relaxed formation. Crews were unprepared for immediate contact. Then, a single German Tiger tank appeared. Its commander was Michael Whitman. Within minutes, chaos exploded across the British column. Tanks burned one after another. Armored carriers erupted into flames. Anti-tank guns were destroyed before they could deploy. The entire advance collapsed under the assault of one heavily armed German tank moving aggressively through the formation. 15 minutes. That was all it took to stop an entire British offensive operation. To German high command, Villers-Bocage confirmed everything they already believed. Superior armored vehicles, used aggressively by skilled crews, could dominate entire battlefields almost by themselves. The formula seemed obvious. Better tanks meant battlefield superiority. But hidden beneath the victory was a dangerous illusion. Whitman succeeded because the British force had no rapid system to respond. No artillery immediately registered on the road. No air support capable of arriving within minutes. No anti-tank reserve positioned for sudden armored contact. The British were caught fighting the wrong kind of battle at the wrong moment. Germany noticed the destruction. They failed to notice the weakness behind it. And that mistake would become fatal. Because while Germany kept refining the perfect tank, America was quietly building something else entirely. Something harder to photograph, harder to measure, harder even to recognize. Not a machine, a system. A battlefield organism made from radios, artillery networks, air power, decentralized command, mobile logistics, and armored doctrine, all functioning together as one living structure. Germany kept asking how to build the best tank. America had started asking a different question. How do you create a battlefield where the enemy's superior tank no longer matters? That question began with humiliation, and humiliation changed the United States Army forever. February 1943, Kasserine Pass, North Africa. The Americans entered the battle inexperienced, overconfident, and badly coordinated. German armored forces shattered them repeatedly. Relief units arrived one at a time and were destroyed separately. Artillery support failed. Air support arrived too late. Communications collapsed under pressure. Entire American formations disintegrated across the Tunisian mountains. The defeat shocked the United States Army. But unlike many militaries in history, America did something extremely dangerous after failure. It learned. Not emotionally, not politically, systematically. American officers studied every mistake with brutal honesty. The problem was not inferior courage. It was not inferior equipment. It was integration. German forces combined tanks, infantry, artillery, reconnaissance, and command flexibility into a single operational organism. American units operated like disconnected pieces. So the Army rebuilt itself around one central principle: speed of coordination. Forward artillery observers moved alongside tanks. Air liaison officers embedded directly with armored formations. Radio networks linked ground commanders to fighter aircraft overhead. Junior officers gained authority to make rapid decisions without waiting for permission from distant headquarters. The goal was no longer individual battlefield perfection. The goal became response speed. See the threat, react immediately. Overwhelm the enemy's decision cycle before he adapts. By the summer of 1944, the American army that crossed France was no longer the same force destroyed at Kasserine Pass. Germany still saw Sherman tanks. What they failed to see was the invisible machine surrounding them. The most dangerous weapon at Arracourt was not the Sherman. It was not the Hellcat. It was not even the P-47 Thunderbolt circling overhead. It was time.
More specifically, the speed at which the American system could observe a threat, process information, and respond before German commanders understood what was happening. Germany entered the battle believing armor thickness determined survival. The Americans entered the battle believing reaction speed determined victory. That difference changed everything. The M18 Hellcat represented this philosophy perfectly. Even today, many people misunderstand the vehicle completely. They assume the Hellcat was intended to duel Panthers directly. It was not. In a straight confrontation, the Panther almost always held the advantage. Better armor, better range, better penetration. The Hellcat was designed for something else entirely: movement. At over 50 miles per hour on roads, it became the fastest tracked armored vehicle of the Second World War. That speed was not built for retreat. It was built for repositioning faster than the enemy could adapt. Strike from one direction, relocate immediately. Appear somewhere unexpected, fire again before the enemy reorients. Never allow the battlefield to stabilize into the kind of long-range engagement where German armor excelled. The Hellcat was not a shield. It was a knife. And knives do not win by standing still. American crews trained obsessively around one fact about the Panther: its frontal armor was terrifying. Its side armor was not. Once a Panther exposed its flank, the entire equation changed. A 76mm American shell hitting the side of a Panther at close range became lethal. Not because the Hellcat was stronger overall, but because geometry replaced brute force. The Americans stopped trying to overpower the Panther.
They started trying to outposition it. Meanwhile, the Sherman tank played a role almost nobody understood at the time. In popular history, Sherman crews are often portrayed as victims facing superior German armor. But at Arracourt, the Sherman's true purpose inside the American system was psychological. The Sherman existed to be seen. When a Panther crew identified an approaching Sherman, instinct forced them to react. Turrets rotated, frontal armor shifted toward the visible threat, attention narrowed onto the enemy directly ahead. And during those few seconds of focus, something deadly usually happened somewhere else. A Hellcat fired from the side, or artillery shells landed behind the German formation, or fighter aircraft appeared overhead. The Sherman acted like a hand distracting a duelist, while another blade slid quietly toward the ribs. No single American weapon dominated the battlefield alone. That was the point. Each part existed to amplify the others, and above all of them hovered the element Germany never truly solved in Western Europe: air power. The P-47 Thunderbolt was enormous, brutal, and terrifying at low altitude. Unlike sleek fighter aircraft designed for elegant dogfights, the Thunderbolt looked more like an engine wrapped in armor plating. It carried bombs, rockets, and 850 caliber machine guns capable of shredding vehicles from above. But the aircraft itself was only half the story. The real revolution was communication. American air liaison officers traveled directly with armored formations. They carried radios linked to fighter squadrons already circling nearby in rotating patrol patterns. When German armor appeared, the call could go out immediately. Not hours later, minutes later. That changed the psychology of movement. German tank crews no longer feared all of the enemy in front of them. They feared the sky itself. A Panther caught moving through open terrain suddenly became vulnerable from every direction at once. Hellcats threatened the flanks. Sherman tanks fixed attention forward. Artillery punished road junctions and retreat routes. Then Thunderbolts descended from above with rockets and machine gun fire. The battlefield became layered. And every radio mattered. Every artillery observer mattered. Every pilot overhead mattered. Every junior officer making independent decisions mattered. Germany still approached warfare like a collection of elite machines. America had begun fighting like a nervous system. And systems become terrifying once they mature under pressure. 5 days before Arracourt fully erupted, the Americans received proof that the machine was working. September 13th, 1944, near the town of Dompierre, a fresh German Panzer brigade advanced into a valley expecting another armored engagement. Instead, it entered something closer to an execution chamber. French and American forces positioned Sherman tanks in hull-down defensive positions along elevated terrain. Artillery already covered the road exits. Air support remained on standby overhead. When the German Panthers entered the valley, there was nowhere safe to move. Thunderbolts struck from above. Artillery trapped movement corridors. American and French armor engaged from prepared positions. Entire German formations collapsed before they could properly deploy. One Panther battalion was virtually erased in a single day. It became one of the fastest armored destructions on the Western Front. The warning signs existed. German intelligence simply failed to understand what they meant.
Because from the German perspective, tanks still defined the battlefield. They continued measuring enemy strength by armor counts and gun caliber. They still believed the decisive factor was the quality of the machine. Arracourt was about to prove that the machine no longer controlled the war. The system did.
By mid-September of 1944, the German High Command understood something terrifying. The Western Front was collapsing faster than expected. After the disaster in Normandy and the destruction inside the Falaise pocket, German forces were retreating across France almost continuously. Fuel shortages crippled movement. Supply lines fractured under Allied air attacks. Entire divisions existed mostly on paper. But Adolf Hitler refused to accept defensive stabilization. He demanded a counterattack. Not a local defense, not a strategic withdrawal. An offensive powerful enough to strike General George Patton's advancing Third Army before the Americans reached the German border. The responsibility for this operation fell to General Hassel von Manteuffel. Unlike many commanders in the final years of the war, Manteuffel was not delusional. He understood armored warfare deeply. He had fought on the Eastern Front. He knew Germany lacked the industrial strength for endless offensives. But when he examined the situation around Lorraine in September 1944, the opportunity appeared real. Patton's forces were overextended. American fuel shortages had slowed the advance dramatically because Allied logistics prioritized Operation Market Garden farther north. Many American armored formations temporarily lacked the gasoline needed to continue rapid movement. To German commanders, a stalled armored army looked vulnerable. Even more encouraging, the Americans defending Arracourt belonged to the 4th Armored Division. Although experienced from the breakout across France, they had not yet faced a prolonged large-scale armored assault from concentrated German Panther formations. Manteuffel believed timing favored Germany. And on paper, he was absolutely correct. 2 Panzer brigades moved into position, the 111th and 113th Panzer brigades. Fresh formations, newly equipped, nearly 90 Panthers combined alongside Panzer IVs and mechanized infantry. The arithmetic was simple. German were superior, numerical concentration achieved, American forces low on fuel,
I can't run any
limiting
faster in
Allied
this
aircraft
mud.
visibility.
Just keep going!
The offensive should work. But hidden underneath the statistics was a bigger weakness. The German brigades were incomplete.
They possessed tanks, yes, but tanks alone had never actually been enough. Germany's greatest victories earlier in the war came from combined arms integration. Fast reconnaissance, flexible artillery support, coordinated infantry movement, clear communications between units. By 1944, Germany increasingly lacked those elements. Many of the new Panzer brigades had been assembled too quickly. Crews received Panthers fresh from factories with limited training time. Reconnaissance assets remained thin. Artillery coordination weakened. Fuel shortages restricted operational flexibility even before combat began. Worse still, German intelligence completely misunderstood what waited around Arracourt. Reconnaissance photographs showed Shermans. They counted tank destroyers. They identified defensive positions. But photographs could not capture the invisible structure connecting everything together. They could not photograph radio networks. They could not photograph command flexibility. They could not photograph the experience American officers had accumulated after nearly 2 years of learning modern mechanized warfare the hard way. Most importantly, they could not photograph decision speed. While German brigades still relied on rigid command structures struggling to coordinate newly assembled formations, American combat commands had evolved into flexible battlefield organisms. At Arracourt, American commanders could coordinate tanks, artillery, airstrikes, reconnaissance, and defensive repositioning almost simultaneously through direct radio communication. The Germans were preparing for a powerful armored thrust. The Americans were preparing to dismantle momentum itself. And then, the weather arrived. The fog over Lorraine became so thick during the morning hours that visibility collapsed across the battlefield. From a German perspective, this initially seemed like good fortune. Allied aircraft would struggle to operate effectively. Long-range visibility disappeared. But hidden inside that same fog was the destruction of Germany's greatest advantage: range. The Panther. Suddenly, reaction time mattered more than armor thickness. Position mattered more than gun statistics. Awareness mattered more than technical superiority. And awareness inside the fog belonged to the Americans. At 7:45 in the morning on September 19th, Captain William Dwight climbed Hill 246 alongside 4 M18 Hellcats under Lieutenant Edwin Leeper. They barely finished positioning their vehicles before German Panthers emerged through the mist below them.
The Hellcats opened fire immediately. The first Panther exploded before its crew fully understood where the shots came from. Another followed seconds later, then another. German return fire crashed into the American positions. Hellcats erupted into flames. The battle became brutally close and chaotic. Visibility remained fragmented. Communication broke apart inside smoke, fog, and panic. But the American system continued functioning, even under confusion. Elsewhere across the battlefield, more Hellcats waited inside concealed depressions and tree lines. Instead of charging directly into German armor, they allowed Panthers to move past before attacking vulnerable side angles. One engagement after another repeated the same horrifying pattern. German crews advanced confidently. Then vehicles began burning from directions they never expected. At Besange-le-Petit, 4 Hellcats hidden in low terrain destroyed 7 Panthers before daylight fully emerged across Lorraine. And despite heavy American losses, something psychologically devastating had already begun happening inside the German attack. Momentum slowed. Not because Germany lacked courage, because uncertainty entered the battlefield. German crews no longer knew where the danger truly existed. And once armored warfare becomes uncertain, superior machines stop behaving like predators. They begin behaving like prey.
Chaos is usually described as the absence of control. At Arracourt, both sides experienced chaos. Smoke, fog, broken communications, conflicting reports, units disappearing into forests and reappearing miles away. Burning tanks blocking narrow roads while artillery shook the earth beneath them. But there is a difference between organized chaos and collapsing chaos. The Americans understood that difference better than the Germans did. By mid-morning on September 19th, German armored forces had already penetrated parts of the American northern defensive line. Panthers pushed dangerously close toward command positions near Lezay. Several American units lost contact entirely. Officers received battlefield reports that were outdated before the messages even arrived. From a distance, the situation looked unstable, and in many ways it truly was. But beneath the confusion, the American command structure continued adapting in real time. Hellcat crews withdrew from compromised positions and reappeared elsewhere before German units could pursue effectively. Sherman companies established temporary blocking lines across likely advance routes. Artillery batteries fired pre-registered missions onto roads German columns almost instinctively used for movement. No single American officer controlled every piece of the battlefield. That was precisely why the system survived. The battlefield organism did not require perfect central control. It only required constant local adaptation. Meanwhile, the German attack suffered from a deeper problem. Its commanders still believed momentum alone could restore order. For years, German armor doctrine relied heavily on aggressive offensive pressure, fast breakthroughs, continuous forward movement, shock, initiative. The idea was simple: keep the enemy reacting until his defenses collapse faster than he can reorganize. Earlier in the war, this strategy worked brilliantly. But at Arracourt, every kilometer forward pulled German armor deeper into a battlefield already mapped by American artillery observers, radio networks, and mobile anti-tank teams. The farther the Panthers advanced, the more vulnerable they became.
And then, one American commander made a decision that revealed the psychological core of the entire battle. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams. At the time, Abrams commanded the 37th Tank Battalion. He was only 30 years old, but by September 1944, he already understood armored warfare on an instinctive level few officers possessed. He understood something manuals could not teach. Human beings panic before machines do. On September 20th, visibility improved slightly as the fog thinned across Lorraine. That change should have favored Germany. Panthers could finally exploit their long-range guns more effectively. American units faced increasing pressure as German armored thrusts disrupted portions of their defensive alignment. 2 of Abrams' companies became partially disorganized during a German advance. Traditional doctrine suggested withdrawal, pull back, reorganize, consolidate defenses. Abrams chose the opposite. He attacked. Personally leading his Sherman tank forward, Abrams drove directly toward German armor that expected American retreat. His command tank carried a familiar name painted across its side: Thunderbolt. Not the first Thunderbolt he had commanded. Previous tanks carrying the same name had already been destroyed earlier in the war. Abrams simply transferred the name each time he survived another vehicle loss. That detail mattered, because it revealed how experienced American commanders had psychologically adapted by 1944. Tank survival no longer depended on preserving individual vehicles. The system absorbed losses continuously. Crews fought knowing replacement equipment would arrive. The machine continued functioning even while individual components burned. German crews, however, interpreted Abrams' counterattack very differently. To them, the Americans had been falling back moments earlier. Everything suggested German momentum was succeeding. Then suddenly, instead of retreating further, Sherman tanks surged forward aggressively through the confusion. The effect was immediate. German formations hesitated. Some Panthers stopped advancing entirely. Others shifted position defensively. Several crews attempted to reposition toward cover.
momentum fractured across the attack. That hesitation mattered more than armor thickness ever could, because hesitation inside mechanized warfare spreads like infection. Once movement slows, artillery becomes more accurate. Once formations pause, air attacks become easier. Once crews lose confidence in battlefield awareness, initiative begins slipping away.
Abrams sensed that psychological shift instantly, and he exploited it without mercy. His own scattered companies, seeing their commander attack instead of withdraw, reorganized around the movement almost instinctively. American resistance hardened. German offensive pressure weakened. Within hours, the attack that had threatened to destabilize the American line began losing coherence entirely. Years later, General George Patton would call Abrams the best tank commander in the United States Army. Not because he operated a Sherman better than anyone else, because he understood something larger. Battles are fought inside human minds before they are won on maps. And at Arracourt, the German command structure slowly began realizing they no longer understood the battlefield around them. Orders arrived late, units moved without coordination, reconnaissance failed to identify hidden American positions quickly enough. Communication between brigades deteriorated as pressure increased. The 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades had been assembled rapidly from multiple sources. They lacked the operational cohesion earlier German armored formations once possessed. The Americans noticed immediately. German attacks arrived in fragments instead of synchronized waves. Supporting infantry often failed to integrate properly with advancing armor. Artillery coordination weakened. Some units advanced without clear awareness of nearby friendly formations. Against weaker opponents, Panthers could sometimes compensate through raw firepower alone. Against a mature American combined arms system, isolated excellence became increasingly irrelevant. And above the battlefield, hidden behind layers of cloud and fog, another danger waited patiently for visibility to improve. The P-47 Thunderbolts were already circling. They were only waiting for the sky to open. On the morning of September 21st, 1944, the sky above Lorraine finally cleared. For 3 days, fog had suffocated visibility across the battlefield. German tank crews fought almost blind. Their greatest advantage, long-range firepower, remained trapped behind walls of white mist. Now, at last, they could see. Across open farmland and rolling hills, Panther commanders regained the battlefield conditions they had been trained for. Wide firing lanes, extended visibility, distance, space. For a brief moment, it must have felt like the war was returning to normal. Then, the Thunderbolts arrived. The P-47 was not elegant. It did not glide through the sky like a refined fighter aircraft. It was heavy, loud, and brutal. Pilots often described it less like flying a plane and more like controlling a giant engine wrapped in armor plating. And that was exactly what made it terrifying. The moment visibility improved, American air liaison officers embedded with armored formations began transmitting coordinates. Fighter squadrons already flying nearby patrol rotations received targets almost instantly. The response was immediate. Thunderbolts descended through the morning sky in waves. German armored columns moving between positions suddenly exploded under rocket fire. Panthers attempting to regroup near forests were hit before their formations fully stabilized. Supply vehicles carrying fuel and ammunition became burning wrecks along narrow roads. And the most devastating part was not the destruction itself. It was the timing. The German brigades had already spent 3 exhausting days under constant pressure from Hellcats, artillery, and defensive repositioning. Crews slept poorly, communications remained strained. Situational awareness deteriorated continuously. Now, the sky itself turned hostile. German tank crews suddenly faced a battlefield with no safe direction.
Move across open terrain and aircraft attacked. Take cover inside forests and artillery targeted the tree lines. Focus forward against Shermans and Hellcats struck the flanks. Attempt night movement and American units repositioned before dawn. The battlefield no longer behaved like traditional warfare. It behaved like a trap, slowly tightening from every side. At Hill 318 alone, German armored losses became catastrophic. Panthers attempting to maneuver under daylight conditions found themselves exposed simultaneously to artillery fire and air attack coordination refined through nearly 2 years of combat experience. The Americans had learned how to synchronize destruction. Not perfectly, efficiently. That difference mattered. Popular history often imagines warfare through heroic moments, a single tank, a daring charge, one legendary commander changing history through courage alone. Arracourt was something colder. It was industrialized coordination. Artillery observers calmly adjusting fire corrections over radio channels while pilots overhead searched for movement. Tank destroyer crews relocating after every engagement according to rehearsed doctrine. Junior officers independently responding to threats without waiting for centralized approval.
The American system reduced reaction time until German commanders could no longer stabilize events fast enough to regain initiative. And once initiative disappears in mechanized warfare, collapse usually follows quickly. By September 22nd, the 113th Panzer Brigade had effectively ceased functioning as a coherent offensive force. Tanks remained scattered across Lorraine, but organization itself had broken apart. Some Panthers were destroyed outright. Others simply ran out of fuel. Many surviving crews withdrew eastward without clear coordination, attempting to escape a battlefield they no longer controlled or even fully understood. The 111th Panzer Brigade suffered little better.
What Germany intended as a decisive armored counteroffensive slowly transformed into an expensive disintegration of combat power, and the numbers became impossible to ignore. Over the course of the Arracourt fighting, German armored losses climbed into the hundreds. Panthers, Panzer IVs, assault guns, support vehicles, transport columns, entire formations shattered within days. American losses existed too, of course. Sherman tanks burned across the countryside, Hellcat crews died in brutal close-range engagements, men disappeared inside explosions before radio operators even finished transmitting coordinates. But the ratio told the real story. Germany lost irreplaceable offensive capability. America lost components inside a functioning machine. That distinction would decide the rest of the war. Because by late 1944, Germany could still build excellent tanks. What it could no longer build was a superior system. Factories continued producing Panthers, but production no longer solved strategic weakness. New vehicles arrived faster than experienced crews could be trained properly. Fuel shortages restricted operations. Allied bombing campaigns damaged infrastructure continuously. Meanwhile, the United States expanded everything. More radios, more artillery shells, more aircraft, more replacement vehicles, more logistical capacity, more communication networks, more integration. Germany still focused enormous effort on perfecting individual battlefield tools. America increasingly focused on ensuring every battlefield tool connected seamlessly into one operational organism. And once industrial warfare reaches that stage, technical superiority alone stops being enough. A masterpiece can still lose to a factory, especially when the factory learns faster. This was the deeper tragedy hidden inside the Panther itself. Because the Panther truly was magnificent. Its gun remained deadly, its armor remained formidable, its battlefield performance against isolated opponents often appeared extraordinary. German crews continued inflicting severe casualties whenever conditions favored direct armored combat. But the war around the Panther had evolved beyond direct armored combat. And Germany realized that too late. The Americans no longer asked how to build a better tank. They asked how to create a battlefield where tanks became only one piece of a much larger equation. Arracourt answered that question with terrifying clarity. And Germany had no answer left.
The most dangerous misunderstanding in military history is the belief that victory belongs to the strongest weapon. Because strength is contextual. A sword dominates an unarmed man. A rifle dominates a sword. Artillery dominates infantry formations. Aircraft dominate exposed armor. And systems dominate everything once the battlefield becomes connected enough. Arracourt was not the moment Germany discovered America had better tanks. It was the moment Germany discovered tanks themselves were no longer the center of modern war. That realization did not happen instantly. It emerged slowly through burning wreckage scattered across Lorraine. Every destroyed Panther represented more than steel loss. It represented collapsing assumptions. German doctrine still treated armored warfare as a contest between elite formations achieving decisive breakthroughs through concentrated violence. That philosophy had carried Germany across Europe in the early years of the war. Poland, France, the Balkans, massive encirclements on the Eastern Front. But blitzkrieg depended on conditions Germany no longer possessed by 1944. Air superiority was gone. Fuel abundance was gone. Experienced crews were disappearing faster than they could be replaced. Most importantly, Germany no longer controlled the speed of information. The Americans did. At Arracourt, information moved faster through the American system than German units could physically react. That fact changed everything. When a German column appeared near a village road, American artillery observers already had firing coordinates prepared. When Panthers attempted to regroup behind tree lines, reconnaissance aircraft often identified movement within minutes. When American units encountered unexpected pressure, nearby formations adapted rapidly through decentralized communication. German commanders repeatedly found themselves reacting to situations already evolving beyond their awareness. And mechanized warfare punishes delayed understanding mercilessly. This was where American doctrine became psychologically devastating. The Germans still believed battlefield control meant controlling territory. The Americans increasingly understood battlefield control meant controlling tempo.
If the enemy constantly reacts while you constantly adapt first, territorial movement eventually becomes irrelevant. The opponent slowly loses the ability to stabilize events. That is exactly what happened at Arracourt. German attacks never fully synchronized. One formation advanced before another arrived. Panthers entered combat zones unsupported by infantry. Artillery coordination lagged behind movement. Communications deteriorated as pressure increased. Meanwhile, the American battlefield organism continued functioning despite local losses. That resilience shocked German commanders. Earlier in the war, destroying enemy armored concentrations often shattered operational cohesion. At Arracourt, destroyed American tanks frequently had almost no effect on overall battlefield response. Crews died, vehicles burned, yet nearby artillery still fired accurately. Air support still arrived, replacement formations still maneuvered. The system absorbed damage and continued operating. That ability defines mature industrial warfare, not invulnerability, continuity. Germany increasingly lacked it. By late 1944, German logistics had become dangerously fragile. Fuel shortages forced commanders into impossible decisions. Some Panther crews received advanced vehicles but insufficient gasoline for realistic maneuver training. Spare parts remained inconsistent. Recovery operations became hazardous under Allied air superiority. A damaged Panther often stayed damaged. An abandoned Panther often stayed abandoned. And every lost experienced crewman became harder to replace than the vehicle itself. The Americans understood this imbalance clearly. That is why they accepted higher vehicle losses in exchange for operational momentum. Shermans and Hellcats were not expected to survive indefinitely. They were expected to remain replaceable inside a functioning system. Germany built masterpieces. America built continuity. That distinction sounds cold until you realize modern war itself is cold. Factories matter. Fuel matters. Training pipelines matter.
Communication speed matters. A brilliant weapon without sustainable integration eventually becomes a museum piece surrounded by corpses, and the Panther slowly became exactly that. One of the cruelest ironies of Arracourt was that German crews often fought extremely well on the tactical level. Individual Panther commanders demonstrated courage repeatedly. Many engagements became brutally close range and intensely violent. American losses were real and painful. But tactical bravery could not compensate for systemic exhaustion. Germany had reached the point where battlefield excellence no longer solved strategic collapse. The Americans, meanwhile, grew stronger through adaptation. Every campaign before Arracourt contributed to this evolution. Kasserine Pass taught the United States Army humility. Sicily taught coordination. Normandy taught survival under attrition. The breakout across France taught operational speed. By the time American forces reached Lorraine, they were no longer improvising modern mechanized warfare. They were refining it. And refinement is terrifying once combined with industrial scale. Because mature systems stop depending on extraordinary individuals. They begin generating reliable outcomes automatically. That was the real nightmare hidden beneath the fog at Arracourt. Not the Hellcat, not the Sherman, not the Thunderbolt. The nightmare was that Germany faced an enemy learning faster than it could adapt. And history rarely forgives that imbalance. There was another battle before Arracourt that almost nobody remembers today. Yet without it, Arracourt might never have happened the way it did. August 1944. Mortain, Normandy. By this stage of the war, Allied forces had already broken out from the beaches and were racing across France. Hitler understood the danger immediately. If the Americans reached the coast in strength, German armies trapped farther west risked total encirclement. So Germany launched one of its largest armored counterattacks on the Western Front. 4 panzer divisions, nearly 300 tanks. Veterans from the Eastern Front, experienced SS armored formations. Crews hardened by years of mechanized warfare against the Soviet Union. On paper, this should have been catastrophic for the Americans. And initially, the attack achieved surprise. German armor surged forward through the early morning darkness, attempting to split Allied forces before they could react. Panthers and Tigers rolled westward across Normandy roads with the same aggressive doctrine that had once shattered entire European armies. But something fundamental had changed since the early years of the war. The Americans already knew the attack was coming. Signals intelligence intercepted German communications before the offensive began. American commanders received advance warning. Artillery observers positioned on elevated terrain prepared firing zones in advance. Air support remained ready the moment weather conditions improved. And when the German armored columns advanced, the American system responded exactly as it had been designed to. Artillery struck first, not randomly, methodically. Observers on Hill 314 coordinated continuous fire missions onto German approach routes. Shells rained onto roads, crossroads, assembly points, and choke positions hour after hour. Even when German forces surrounded the hill completely, American artillery spotters continued transmitting corrections. Food and medical supplies eventually had to be delivered by modified artillery shells because normal resupply became impossible. Still, the fire continued. Then came the aircraft.
The moment weather improved, fighter bombers descended onto congested German formations trapped on narrow roads and exposed terrain. Movement slowed, coordination fractured, momentum disappeared. The attack collapsed. Not because German armor suddenly became weak, because once again, superior tanks entered a battlefield controlled by a larger, integrated system. Mortain became a warning. Arracourt became confirmation. And hidden beneath both battles was a terrifying lesson about the future of warfare itself. Modern war no longer belonged to the strongest platform. It belonged to the side capable of connecting platforms faster. That idea sounds obvious today. In the modern world, everyone understands networks. Information flows instantly across continents. Drones communicate with satellites. Missiles receive mid-course corrections from systems thousands of miles away. But in 1944, this level of battlefield integration was revolutionary, and Germany failed to evolve quickly enough. Part of the reason was structural. The German military culture traditionally emphasized elite professionalism and centralized operational planning. When experienced officers controlled highly trained formations, the system performed brilliantly. Early blitzkrieg campaigns proved that. But by late war conditions, Germany increasingly lost the time and stability necessary to maintain that structure. Veteran officers died. Experienced crews disappeared. Training shortened. Communication quality deteriorated. New formations entered combat before they fully understood how to function together. The American approach evolved differently.
Instead of concentrating effectiveness into elite formations alone, the United States increasingly distributed effectiveness across systems. Radios became standard, artillery coordination improved at lower command levels, air-ground communication expanded, junior officers received more tactical flexibility. This made the American battlefield structure less elegant than the German one, but it also made it more resilient, and resilience becomes terrifying during prolonged industrial war. At Arracourt, German commanders repeatedly discovered that damaging one part of the American system rarely stopped the rest. Destroy Sherman tanks? Hellcats still maneuver. Destroy Hellcats? Artillery still fires. Force local withdrawal? Aircraft still arrive overhead. The organism continued adapting because it no longer depended on perfect conditions. That adaptability frustrated German crews psychologically. Many Panther commanders entered engagements expecting familiar battlefield patterns. Identify enemy armor, establish range superiority, engage methodically, destroy targets through superior firepower. Instead, the battlefield constantly shifted around them. American units refused predictable engagement geometry. Anti-tank positions relocated rapidly, artillery interrupted movement timing, air attacks appeared unpredictably whenever visibility improved. The Germans increasingly fought a battlefield that behaved irrationally compared to the warfare they had mastered earlier in the war. And once battlefield expectations collapse, fear grows rapidly. Because fear in mechanized warfare is not always fear of death, it is fear of uncertainty. Not knowing where the next threat exists. Not knowing whether advancing creates advantage or vulnerability. Not knowing if every movement exposes the formation to invisible coordination already unfolding somewhere beyond sight. That uncertainty slowly poisoned German operational confidence throughout Arracourt. Meanwhile, the Americans became calmer as the battle continued. Not because the fighting grew easier, because the system kept working. And once soldiers trust the system around them, endurance becomes possible even under chaos. That psychological stability mattered enormously, especially against an enemy whose confidence depended increasingly on machines that could no longer dominate the battlefield alone.
All units, target moving southwest. Awaiting engagement orders.